Hello and welcome back to my screen recorded video. This isn't a what I consumed video, which I usually do quarterly. I've been thinking about other things I might want to share in this format, but lately I've just been thinking a lot about creative process and also what is required of the individual in entering a creative process and how to be creative under capitalism. And so I feel like I've been picking up some little bits and pieces over the past 2 years and kind of wanted to put them together for myself and then also share. If you're a creative person or you are interested in taking on a creative hobby, I think that a lot of this information will be helpful. I'm going to break it into some different parts, and I think some might pertain to some people, some might not, so feel free to skip through them. Okay, so I have a Google Doc kind of going on here. So getting into part one of this, I think before you start a creative process, you really need to examine your intentions going into it in order to make it into a fulfilling and positive experience for yourself. And I think that these are some things that I have kind of like found out mid-process and then have circled back. I think if you open up TikTok, you're going to get 100 videos of, how to make your work and how to have an effective process and all of these types of content often for content creators about making content. And I will say in this, I'm not really talking about content creation in this video. I'm really talking about art. Anything that doesn't really have a profitable point to it in a sense. We have a fascination as a society with this kind of cure or magic process to make everything easier when it comes to creation. Going into even this video, there is no magic process, there is no cure, there is nothing that's going to fix your mindset and make it so easy to make art every day. There's no perfect routine, there's no perfect meditation. It's very easy to become obsessed with that type of content, and I think it's very good to go into any version of it, including this video, with a skeptic's eye. I've heard people say this statement before, like, you have to find what works for you, or whatever. In a perfect world, I actually don't think that we would all have to find what works for us. I think that a lot of things would work for a lot of people, and it wouldn't be that hard to be creative. But unfortunately, we live in a society driven by profit, and the commodification of our time and labor, especially anywhere in the Western world, but I'm specifically talking from an American's point of view. There is no magic process because society does not want you to make art. Society does not want you to do anything that does not contribute to its productivity. Something that people really forget when they're talking about they get in their heads and they tell themselves, oh, it's so hard. I can't get myself to sit down and write music, or I want to write novels or something like that. And give yourself a little bit more grace. Every single thing throughout your entire day is actually kind of telling you not to do that. It's telling you that you need to make more money. It's telling you not to take risks. And we are also surrounded by a society of artists who are applauded and revered for financial success. A lot of Americans, when they go to Europe, especially American artists, feel that this is a big difference between America and Europe. Obviously, people are still respected for their financial success. I know, just like going to theater school, the idea that there were companies of theater artists and actors who just made stuff together that was weird and random, and that the government would fund that was, sorry, sirens. I think we are continuously always very surprised or taken aback by art for art's sake. That is something to be gentle about with yourself when you want to create. Yeah, I'm kind of just riffing off of the top of my head, so this won't be the most beautiful thing that's ever been written, but there's no magic process or cure. We live in a society driven by the commodification of our labor and, more recently, our attention, and I think that's really important. It's very hard to focus on your art when your attention is being competed with by everything on the planet right now. Further on this, I love the quote that it's the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. And I think about that a lot when I am being sold anything or any type of success. So I would just say keep that in the back of your mind. And then also, in terms of all of this, there is no way to fully opt out of capitalism. And I think that is something that I really want to talk about in this process. And I'm gonna get down to, this is a lot more about like the nitty gritty of art making than the fun, creative, dipping my hand in the well of my soul part. And I think that could be a totally other video. I also think there's so much writing and incredible literature about that already. This is really how to be an artist when your time doesn't exist. This man posted this video when he quit his job, and I think it just kind of reminds me of the freedom that we can experience, and I think it also reminds yourself to extend grace towards yourself. So we'll watch him. I think we all have moments in our life like that man does where we can see it so clearly and we can choose so clearly. We live in the messiness of the day-to-day choice of it, which is that every choice is either in accordance or against. So that's tough. There's one more TikTok I want to share kind of in this idea of aligning your values before you start.
Friendly reminder, only in a society starved of love does the desire for fame even exist. And celebrity is the embodiment of the corporate state for when they need to sell you something that requires a human attached to it, which evidently they won't need for long.
Another value that you really want to align that before you get started on a project. I think I hear of a lot of content around making art encouraging you to just go, like get into it, like you'll get there. And it's very similar to climbing that corporate ladder, but you're just doing it with art. You're going to be miserable. I really think you have to have a different intention, and you have to know within your own self in what areas are you starving, like in what areas are you desiring approval and trying to please others. There is a beautiful interaction between the artist and the audience when making work. However, that is a separate thing than desiring success in art the way that capitalism views it. The other thing I want to say about this is that I kind of saw something, I don't even know what the video was. She was writing novels and she was like, I made it a bit with myself because I have a full-time job and I decided to make it a bit that I would write a book. And I think that that's great. That worked for her. However, when you really consider the fact of how defiant making art is, even if it's not that big of a deal, and even if you're just doing it for yourself, which I think you should, as we'll get into later, it's not a bit. Like, it's not, even if your art is a hobby, I invite you to take yourself more seriously. You're engaging with your consciousness and your soul in a way that is so deep and sometimes scary. And so it's not just a bit at all to me, Nobody's work is a bit to me. Engaging in this requires sacrifice. There isn't a way to have everything. There isn't a way to have all the money and also be engaging in practice. And I think that when it comes to figuring out what works for each person, that is what you sacrifice and what is actually out of balance in your life because of your choice. So I think going into deciding where you want to begin with your artistic practice or a singular project, knowing that you will need to sacrifice time, maybe others' opinions of you, because you are choosing an experience. That's the end of part 1. I hope that made some kind of sense. I think once you kind of have your integrity and is set and you have your values a little bit more in line, part 2 is really how to begin. I think if you've been making art for a while and you already have a practice, you may want to skip this part. You probably have a way that you find inspiration and move through that already. I will share some thoughts on mine. It's a very simple and lovely process in terms of beginning, possibly the least messy part of art making. It's hard to get yourself to start. I'm not saying that's easy. A big thing to check your comfort level on is how okay you are being seen. To engage in a practice that is going to be fulfilling, I think that you need to be comfortable being seen in whatever state you're at, and maybe you don't want to be seen in a certain state, or maybe you need time to process that, and I think that's something to think about. Most people can't even watch themselves on camera. The real fear isn't public speaking, it's being seen. I think about this a lot because I'm an actor and I watch myself on tape all the time, and I also make YouTube videos sometimes. I am very comfortable watching myself on camera. I only get uncomfortable when I feel I am maybe revealing something too raw or vulnerable. I think things do need to be alchemized before they're thrown out there. And then I think honestly the fun part really begins, and how I begin and my sources of inspiration are really in a process of tracking, being aware of what I am consuming and how that is inspiring me. I think a big part of the videos that I make about everything I saw is really a digestion of what I'm seeing and what I see a space for myself to enter into, or something, an appetite for something to be created, not really by others, but by myself. I really make things, I attempt to make things that I would like to receive or I don't have in the world. And it's not even really about looking for the opportunity, it's more just about tracking. It was this one podcast I listened to one time, and I didn't really agree with a lot of what they were saying. However, the one thing I did take away was that they had people track what they called pings. And it was a list that you had in your journal or in your notes app. And it was every time you're kind of out and you're just like, I really wish they made mugs that had 2 handles. Like, I would like to make a theater piece about book clubs. It could be the most random things. It does not even have to be within your artistic discipline. But tracking, you know, those pings, or it can even be as small as like, I really like Emily's work. I want to get a coffee with Emily and talk to her and see if anything comes to me then. Just these little pings in your head. And I think that you get them when you start to open yourself up to more of what you might want to do. It's really entering everything with an openness and a curiosity about what you are going to co-create with whatever's coming in from the universe, I guess you could say, if we want to get spiritual about it. But it kind of takes the onus off of you of like, I am originating this idea, and more of when I am out in my day-to-day life, what is coming to me. And then I think you really need to sit on those ideas and marinate with them. I don't think it's that you get this little idea and maybe you go home and you write a play that night, you know? That is cool, but I think most artists will say that that only happens a few times in their life. And it's more because they've been marinating on the thing for 2 years already. Art takes a lot of time that we don't think of as the actual art of creation. I think when you think about writers, they'll sit with something for so long, or musicians. It is very important to track those ideas and also track when you're wanting to grab them or when you're wanting to let go. You don't have to create them all, and I think you need to give yourself the freedom. Marinate, not marinate. It's almost like tea. I'm gonna say let them steep. What else comes up? When you let an idea really like sit, you're gonna start to track very discordant ideas together. And that is where it gets fun and where it gets really interesting. When I talk also about, I want to backtrack just slightly right now. When I talk about tracking your consumption and your interests, I always think of the section in Lady Bird, which is probably my favorite part of the movie, where the nun is asking her about her college essay, and the nun is going, you talk about Sacramento with such detail. You must love it so much. And Lady Bird goes, I hate Sacramento, I want to leave. And the nun says, don't you think maybe they are the same thing, love and attention? Pay attention to what you are seeing cultivates more love in your life. Cultivates more creativity because it is coming from that loving place. Okay, we're going to call part 3 creation, and then within part 3 there are 3 parts, which sounds very confusing. We'll call them sections. Section 1, which would be making money, which I don't think any of you probably thought I would talk about in this video. Entering this process requires sacrifice, which also requires not necessarily sometimes concrete financial sacrifice, but in the way that you want to think about your time. You will have to budget time to create. I want to give a kind of a small disclaimer here. Obviously, there are times in which it is a real privilege to think more critically about how you want to make money. There are many times when we are in fight or flight or emergency stages where this is not the case. I think that this has been an interesting thing to learn about as I go through my 20s and as I'm in a little bit more of a stable place or a little bit more of a fight or flight. I didn't have time to think about this when I first graduated college and needed to be paying my bills. Now I have the big luxury of being able to think about this, and it's made a huge impact on my work. I think the type of attention I'm talking about is very clear in this video.
Something to keep in mind if you end up choosing a soul-sucking job with a higher salary is that, ironically, there's a scenario in which you end up having less money. So, like, let's say you end up choosing a job where it pays 30% more, but you absolutely hate it. You dread every single minute of that job. Well, what happens a lot of times is those people come home, they do their drinks, their ganja, whatever it is, and then eventually they realize that is not even enough to counteract the depression they experience at work. So they turn to something like spending. People who are not even materialistic, who were very responsible about spending and saving in the past, all of a sudden they're like, I need something else. So they start spending. They start buying gadgets they don't use. They start buying food they don't eat and clothes they don't wear. And before you know it, the job that was paying 30% more means you actually have less saved because you're spending 40 or 45% more.
I have noticed peers just kind of be on the hamster wheel of needing to make more money and never having enough, and noticing that it will never be enough for them. And I think that that is a really important sacrifice to examine. And you also don't know if you're not going to like a job until you try it. And so there's a lot of trial and error with this. And if it works for you to work a 40-hour-a-week job that you like and it's pretty good and you want to pursue an artistic hobby on the side, that's fantastic. But if it's really starting to drain you, you might actually be not only ignoring your artistic process, but you might also be spending money that you could have put towards taking time off, money that you could have put towards your artistic projects themselves. That is a personal choice. It's very personal. Money is very personal, but money is also time. And unfortunately, you have very limited choice in the matter, but what choices you make are really important. And there's no perfect choice. Like I said before, like this is not easy. This is how I'm putting it right now. If you can be intentional about your work that you do for money, it's imperative that you make choices that either fuel or are neutral and do not retract from your artistic resources, time, money, energy. Okay, this is my own coined term. Art admin is so important to budget into your understanding of how much time a project is going to cost you. Art admin is kind of all the stuff that most artists hate doing, but we are required to do. You talk to a musician and they have to post TikToks. They have to upload things to Spotify. They have to figure out their album art. There's stuff in that which, yeah, you could be creative and fun with how you make your TikToks, or you could be creative and fun with your album art. But at the end of the day, it is kind of annoying, and it is tasks that are not related to the act of making music or playing music or receiving feedback from an audience for that music. Because of the internet and how things work, especially because of the internet and social media, which sucks, but I do think that treating it like it's its own soulless job in the way that your making money job might be is really important. And it's really important to detach or to get help from people that can help you detach when you're doing these things. A good example is right now I'm helping out a friend who is has to do a fundraiser for their thesis film for an MFA. And I have done my own filmmaking and know how hard it is to market your own films and how kind of painful it is. It feels like you're taking this thing, you're also asking for money for it. It's a very uncomfortable process. It's important, and like you can't do this stuff without support. Making the graphics and making a fun video along with it is something that absolutely sucks, and maybe it's not even in your wheelhouse, but you have to budget time for it, and you have to release the perfectionism over it and not see it as a part of your actual work. I think a good example of this is I'm an actor, and that requires, I would say acting requires some of the most admin of the things because you don't really get to act that much. I have to keep my headshots updated, my reel updated. I have to keep my reel updated on multiple sites. I have to have accounts on IMDb Pro, Actors Access, casting networks. I have to have a website. I have to update my Instagram, kind of. I have to pursue other creative projects, such as this. I do this for other reasons, but you get the point. There's just so much shit to do. Like, it's so much, and the process, the practice itself, the artistic practice, the actual process of creation is always going to be fun. Even when it doesn't feel like it is, it's a work that is fulfilling. And then section 3 of this 3-part thing I've created is the actual making of art. I think there is a lot of really good literature about how you might want to define your process. Unfortunately, it does go back to what I've said before, and what people love to say is that it's individual for each person. However, I do think that a routine is very important to establish to feel that you are respecting yourself as an artist. I think the Artist Way is a great backbone for this. I think you have to experiment with types of routine, how you kind of pre-game making art, whether that's a meditation or journaling, or how you post-game, how you wind down. Some people like to work at night. It's just kind of crazy, and you have to figure out what works for you and what motivates you. The trap in that is your routine won't save you. It's not gonna ever be perfect. A big myth with it is that there is a way to achieve some kind of balance. I read this Substack by Haley Nauman, and it's called Making Bad Decisions on Purpose. For nearly a year now, I've been making consistently hedonistic decisions surrounding dessert. Some might deem these choices reckless or unhealthy, and it would be hard to argue otherwise. For the most part, I've allowed them to continue unchecked. The source, of course, is my sweet tooth. Lots of my sugar consumption takes place while I'm working. Anyone who listens to my podcast knows I'm a longtime believer in employing snacks in the writing process. Completing an essay without junk food is inconceivable to me. Sometimes I feel like a lab rat hitting the button for another treat to keep me going. Coping mechanisms can be dangerous. However, I think that when we're talking about the time and creating a routine with art, we also need to be very aware that we will underachieve in other areas of our life because we are putting time into something else. This essay, I think it was maybe in the comments that someone brought this up, but it's Oliver Berkman's concept of strategic underachievement, which involves consciously choosing areas of life where one will deliberately underperform rather than striving for excellence in every aspect. I think that it's okay to be like, I am going to spend 6 months writing something and I probably won't really work out, if that's okay with you, you know? Where are you okay making sacrifice? And that's not some sort of martyrdom for your art. I think that it's just the reality of not putting yourself to too high of a standard that doesn't want you to be putting any time in it in the first place. I know that it might be disappointing that I'm not talking very much about the creative process in its beautiful complexity, but I just think that there's a lot of stuff out there that you already are probably taking in on that. Famous artists love to talk about that. They'll talk about it endlessly. I think it's really good to look up artists that you love or work that you want to emulate and look up as close as you can to what their actual routine and process is. They're usually pretty hesitant to give it because they usually don't have one. I always think about when people ask Meryl Streep her acting process, she doesn't really give a clear answer. She says it switches role to role. It's such an intuitive thing. I think about this Goethe quote, I think that's how you say it, about action. Whatever you think you do or believe you can do, begin it. Action has magic, grace, and power in it. It's kind of cheesy, but like the creative process at its core is just a process of putting something into action. So whether that is the right or wrong thing, it doesn't really matter. And it also doesn't even really matter if you're in a flow state or you're just trying. You'll get there eventually. But it's about repetition, and that repetition will require sacrifice. So I think when it comes to making art, experiment with different types of routine, but your routine will not save you. That really comes down to choosing strategic underachievement in certain areas of your life so that you can do your best in your artistic practice. And that simply at its core is just putting into action your ideas in whatever way you can. I think that the best way to find out what's best for you is to try out different things and to research artists in your field, your favorite artists, artists with similar backgrounds. What does their practice or their lack of practice look like? This was a lot and a little bit all over the place, but I hope that it brought up some good thoughts and is maybe helpful to some people and gives a little bit less pressure and a bit more openness and integrity to your personal process. So I'm going to link this page. I might fix it because it's crazy right now. Thank you so much for watching if you watched this point. I'm not an expert on these things. I'm also just figuring it out, but I find it helpful to review my notes for myself too. So thank you so much for watching. And let me know if there's anything else you're interested in that I should think about making a video on. And yeah, see you soon.